it matters.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of AM Minnesota. I always enjoy when we get educated. Didn't I bring in my sheet of paper that had all the information on it? Thought I did. Here I go to the website, get all this information, have it on a piece of paper so I can have it in front of me, and then I don't bring the piece of paper with me into the studio. John, do you ever do that? Probably not.
I think I have a right to remain silent about that.
Okay. Vice County Attorney John Possum. I mean, you ever go into court? You're getting ready to try a case, and there's an essential piece of evidence, information that you forgot to bring with you to the courtroom?
I excused myself to go downstairs and get it. Luckily, my office isn't far from the courtroom.
Well,
so
that's true.
I haven't had that issue.
You have that luxury. I'll let you do the honor, John, of introducing our guest today.
Sure. Well, with us today is my victim witness coordinator, Shawn Becker. Shawn came to us after a career as a police officer in Idaho and joined our office. It was at the end of December, beginning of January.
End of December.
End of December. So the last week of December, started working for us, and he's been doing a great job. And I brought him with me today to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that he does in our office, and particularly our Start by Believing campaign, which we kicked off last month.
What I find interesting, Shawn, is that you left the police profession. What prompted that decision?
Career advancement, and a little bit of a different direction. Just
Sure.
really focusing on helping victims and helping them navigate through the criminal justice system.
So instead of catching criminals, you decided to go on a different focus to assist victims.
Yes.
I just find that interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it's great. I mean, it shows a real motivation, I think,
Yeah.
on Shawn's part to do something different, and it, with his assistance, I think we're changing the focus of our victim witness programming and making sure that we're doing we're trying to make sure that we're doing a better job of connecting with the victims and providing them the support they need, and Shawn's a big part of that for us.
Well, you've been out and been on calls dealing with this before. You bring a unique perspective, I think, to the position.
Absolutely. So I have a very large background in dealing with traumatic events and how trauma affects the brain and victims, and that's where my passion is helping victims out.
Cool. Well, I'm sure that's why John got into what he got into too, right? We get to help people. That's cool.
Well, right. That's one of the many impulses people have, and that's why we're here, is to try and help people out and protect public safety.
Again, it's the Start Believing campaign.
Start by Believing campaign. What we're trying to do is make sure that people who report sexual assaults, domestic assaults, get a fair opportunity to be heard, and that we have a good opportunity to pursue those cases. And it's a program that Shawn has been spearheading for my office, and that's something that we started, like I said, last month. And I'd like to have him just give you kind of the overview.
Sure. This is a national campaign, right, Shawn?
International campaign.
Oh, it's international. And then you just kind of adopted it as your own and tweaked it a little bit, or how did that work?
Yeah, it's a public awareness campaign that was brought on by the End Violence Against Women International, and essentially what it is they've made it available for all communities to just kind of take it and mold it into their own campaign. And the reason that I got started in this, just let me ask you a question, is have you ever called 911?
Me, personally, never. No.
Never. Okay, so generally speaking, when somebody calls 911, do you think that they call because they need help, or do you think they call because they're mad at somebody?
Well, you're thinking most times it's because they need help.
Right, and so that's really the reason why I started into this campaign, is because victims, when they call 911, it's because they need help. It's not because of revenge or
Sure.
anything else.
I'm going to let you hold that thought. You're a mental health professional. This is Mental Health Month. So We'll be talking about that on Monday. I'll be on the road to Cannon Falls on Tuesday. We'll be at the Shepherd Center of the Cannon Valley. They have an open house. We were there for an open house a couple months ago, and they enjoyed our company, believe it or not, so we stopped by again on Tuesday. Dr. Clint Munch will be our guest on Wednesday. The orthopedic surgeon and the Faribault Police Chief, Andy Bolton, will join me next Thursday. Next week is National Police Week. Of course, Sunday, I believe, is National Police Memorial Day. Is that right, John?
That I don't have that information
okay,
off the top of my head. I'm
No,
sorry.
it's okay. I believe it. I believe it is. National Week is National Police. Well, you were a police officer. National Police Week. Monday is National Police Memorial Day. I'll
Sounds
just go
about
by
right.
saying.
Yeah.
And Andy will be with us on Thursday. We're going to talk about your former profession and some of the challenges that they are facing these days, which you could probably do a whole show on yourself, Shawn.
Sure.
But I interrupted you because we had to do our market update. You were telling us about this campaign, so.
Well, the Start by Believing campaign, it's a public awareness campaign. It's uniquely focused on the response to sexual assault. And this is because when someone has been sexually assaulted, usually the first person they confide in is a friend or a family member, maybe a church leader, maybe a teacher, and they usually confide into that person. And that person's reaction is the first step in either getting justice or the first step in that person for healing. And so that reaction that that person has, if it's a positive, I believe in you reaction, then the victim will then be able to transform into a survivor. If the reaction goes with a lot of the rape myths that are out there, or provides victim blaming excuses, the victim may not transform into that survivor and have a bunch of issues down the road.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the whole law enforcement, and I'll include the attorney's offices and that sort of thing, used to treat this differently than they do today, right? And it used to be the victims of sexual assault had to, it seemed like, prove that they weren't sexually assaulted, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Or prove that they were all on their own, right? It's a and that's part of the nature of this campaign, is to make sure that we're moving past those bad old days of you asked for it, you deserved it, it's your fault.
Right.
That couldn't really have happened, and that's not a fair way for us to be treating victims or people who feel like they've been victimized. We should give them a fair hearing and give them a chance. Now, it may not mean that the case is a great case or something we can pursue, because there's always difficulties in these cases. But we want to start by giving people a fair hearing at the beginning and not making them jump through a bunch of hoops and feel like they're being interrogated and that people believe that they're lying right from the start. And that's not a fair or appropriate way to deal with people.
Right. Now, 9 out of 10 or maybe 8 out of 10 times, it's one person's word against another's, right?
Well, and you know, but that's one of the great myths of sexual assault, is that because there are two people with different views of the facts and there's no evidence on one side or another, the court just can't make a determination because it's he said, she said. That is what courts do. Courts are here to decide credibility issues and decide who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth. And if they believe, you know, if there's some evidence to support it, that's great. But that doesn't mean that's the only way we can proceed. We can proceed just based on someone's credible story and what facts support that.
So that's what the Start by Believing campaign is all about, as you said, from the outset, believing the person's story.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand that some of the dynamics of sexual predators, and that most rapists will attack on an average of 6 times before they're caught on once. So one failed response could actually equal 5 more victims before people come forward. And so it's really hard for victims to come forward if their friends don't even believe them. All right. So if you don't believe me, then it's going to be really hard for me to go to a complete stranger, a police officer or a nurse, to tell my story because my friends or my family didn't even believe me. So this is really starting with the community to come together and to not use victim blaming excuses, not blame the victim because, and I use she because it's generally she's.
Sure.
Okay, but it could be he's, but not saying that she drank too much or she wore inappropriate clothing or you put yourself in this situation. We want everybody in the community to be safe, and it's really the offender. And so everybody needs to kind of change their focus and on the offender and not on the victim behavior. And so, but this is a unique public awareness campaign, and it really starts out with simple words that I believe you.
3 simple words. They
And
mean a lot.
you know, the reality too is, Gordy, is the social research tells us that the vast majority of sexual assaults are not reported. And that creates a real risk to all of us, you know, particularly young women. But if these predators are not caught, if they're not dealt with through the system, that creates a risk that they're remaining out there. As Shawn said, you know, they could offend up to 5 more times before we wind up catching them, because people were negative when someone reported a sexual assault, and that's what we want to avoid. We want to make sure we're protecting the victims, and also that we're protecting public safety by dealing with these cases as they come up.
You must have a theory why people don't come forward.
Well, I think that I touched on that. It's already with, if I go to somebody that I trust, that's who I'm going to confide in first. So if I had a sexual assault happen to me, I'm going to go tell a friend or a loved one. And depending on their reaction is going to make the difference on whether I pursue forward or not. And there's a lot of, well, quite frankly, I don't want to talk with you about my last sexual experience, and you don't want to talk with me about yours. So how hard is it for somebody to come forward and talk about a sexual experience with a law enforcement officer or a medical professional?
Yeah, somebody who's a total stranger.
Absolutely.
In most cases, a total stranger.
Yeah. And so really that just, I believe you, is so comforting to somebody that's been a victim of sexual assault, that can help the process in going forward.
And you know, the reasons for not reporting are the reasons we've already talked about too, which is that, you know, people believe that myth of he said, she said, and there's no remedy for that, or that there is just that embarrassment or the assumption that you're going to be put under a spotlight if you make this complaint. If you try to let somebody know that something terrible happened, and we want to make sure that we're protecting people and giving them that safe space to report so that we can investigate those cases and see
Well,
which ones we can.
it will become public, so more people will know.
Right.
That's a fact.
That's a fact, and there is no, you know, there's no remedy for that, because people have a constitutional right to a public trial, and they have a constitutional right to confront and cross-examine the witnesses against them. But it doesn't mean that they should be getting away with rape or sexual assault because somebody was afraid to report.
So how do you handle that, Shawn? I mean, if I'm a victim and, you know, I don't want my name traipsed out in public to let people know that I was victimized like that.
Well, there's certain things that a victim can do. One of the victim rights in the state of Minnesota is that you can tell law enforcement that you want your address kept secret, you know, and we can do the best that we can at trying to mitigate that. But if the media shows up, you show up in a court hearing, you know, that's going to be up to the prosecutor's office to argue whether or not the media is allowed there.
I mean, is that one of the reasons you think some people don't come forward?
I'm sure that's part of it too, but I guess our goal and our function in trying to do this is to make this make this safer. As Shawn said, that their name may not be their name probably won't be in the complaint. We don't identify the victims in our complaints, and that's a public document. Obviously, the person who is accused knows who it is, and they'll have that information. But by the time we get to a trial, they're going to have to come out and testify publicly, and if they don't want to do that, that's going to be an issue that we'd have to resolve and figure out how to deal with. But we can't get to that point, and we can't get to a point where we're negotiating a resolution if we don't get the complaint in the first place, and if we don't know that there's been a sexual assault, or 3 or 4 by the same person.
So bottom line, you're encouraging people today, report sexual assault.
Absolutely.
Report any kind of assault.
Right, and if you've been harmed, and you should feel safe in calling the police and filing that report, and the police will take that report and get the information to our office, and we'll deal with it as best we can.
I'm going to guess, Shawn, that you've had some training with officers here locally?
Not yet. Just to kind of, if we have time, I can explain how I got started in this.
Sure.
So about 8 years ago, maybe 9 now, I went to a training that was put on by Dr. Kim Longsway, who actually works with the End Violence Against Women International. And she put on this great training where she had put together these cases out of California and passed them around the room. And she asked each of us to read the case as groups. And then we each read the case, and then we each presented the case to the rest of the class, and we said we identified all the red flags, and every group identified that each one of these cases we all thought were bogus, and we weren't believing the victim. Well, at the end of it, she provided us an aha moment where she said this was actually a serial rapist who was caught later down the road. And so then we all went, oh my gosh, we're just reading reports and doing this. So what are we doing when victims come to our offices? So as I work, like I said, I worked sex crimes for about 8 years, 9 years, and I took that information back and started looking at how I was doing investigations, and just started out by believing the victims. And what I found is that my cases became more successful when I focused not necessarily on what the victim is telling me, but what are they not telling me, what put them in the situation, and what psychological evidence could I get there, because sexual predators they're a lot smarter than we are. They are very slow and methodical on choosing their victims, and they will actually plan these events. And so what I've noticed over the period of time is that I was believing victims, and I was getting, my conviction rates went from almost nothing to almost 90% of the cases I submitted for conviction were getting conviction simply because I believed the victim and I saw the victim all the way through. Well, that in turn, my partners who I was working with started seeing the success in that, and so they didn't want to jump on the bandwagon with me at first, but eventually they saw how successful it was, and they in turn went on that as well. And so it took a while. There was a lot of resistance because we all want to believe those myths, and you can't believe those myths.
You gotta shove them aside, John.
Well, exactly. We have to put aside our preconceptions and be fair to everybody and give them a fair hearing, and that's really the goal, to make sure that we're giving people that chance to be heard.
I mean, I would venture to guess that a victim of sexual assault is going through a bit of a grieving process initially. Is it kind of like grief?
Absolutely. It's a very traumatic event.
And the first step in grief, from what I've been taught over the years, is denial.
Yeah. This didn't happen to me, or there's a lot of self-blame, all right, because of how our society is built. yeah, maybe I put myself in that situation, this is my fault, and what could I have done differently? And, you know, so that also comes into play, that when I tell you, my friend, how you respond to that is going to determine which direction I go, which road. Am I going to just kind of continue on to that self-blame, or am I going to actually make that realization that this was not my fault, and then go forward and talk with counselors and law enforcement, medical staff, etc.
So maybe the key person in all of this is the first person the victim talks to.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because that'll plant the seed, so to speak, in the mind, right? A belief or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As the first person, their reaction can make the difference.
Sounds like a good campaign, John.
Well, and that's why we signed on to it.
Yeah.
I think this is an excellent program, and I really appreciate Shawn bringing it to the office and spearheading it for us. And we've been working with our partners at the Hope Center and law enforcement to really draw attention to this and just really improve the way that we deal with people who are in this difficult situation, whether it's grieving or shock or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why people have these roadblocks to move forward and report these horrible things.
In the last few minutes of the show, I know you wanted to touch on a couple of scams that are going on. You wanted to educate folks about that.
Well, sure, and you know, we've seen them a lot. People get phone calls or emails saying they've won the lottery. They've won the Irish sweepstakes, even though they've never been to Ireland, never bought a ticket.
And I've had those before.
If you didn't enter, you probably didn't win.
Yeah.
Don't send anybody any money when you don't know who they are. Don't go off and wire funds to people on the theory that they're going to send you money, because if you won the lottery, they'll be sending money to you. You won't be sending money to them.
Yeah, I've won a cruise more than once.
So the email I got from Nigeria this morning is no good?
That's probably not the one you want to be responding to.
No. So that's obviously, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right, and you know, just be careful if people are calling you over the phone and they want your social security number. Don't give it to them. Your bank isn't calling to verify your account number or your social security number, and the IRS isn't calling to collect your taxes. They'll be sending you notices by mail.
And I got that call, and the person who called said, you know, and I didn't even have an account at that bank.
Yeah.
That's how I knew it was bogus.
Oh, and I got one where they said the local cops are going to come by and arrest me, and I asked them, they said they weren't. So it's not, you know, sometimes it's not even good English. It's a robocall, and just please be very careful and don't fall for that stuff. And since we've got just a few minutes left, I got one more thing I'd like to talk about, if you don't mind. Is tonight at the Grand Event Center in Northfield is a fundraiser for a program that I really believe in. It's called Believe It. It's started by a friend of mine, Sam Daly from Northfield. As I think we've talked about before, I spent some time in Afghanistan training police and prosecutors, and my friend Sam, who was a classmate of mine in high school, also spent some time out in Afghanistan training bomb-sniffing dogs for the Marine Corps. And since he's been back, he started a new program where they are training service dogs for vets with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the program is called Believe It. It's believeit.org. And so they do tremendous work training these dogs for specific veterans to help meet their needs and help people who have social anxiety, who have other issues, who were damaged as a result of their time in the war zone. And the fundraisers at the Grand, there's no cost to come in. We're just asking for a free will donation when you get in the door. We're going to have the Zillionaires playing, local band from Northfield, and I think it's a tremendous program, and we'd appreciate it if people show up and consider supporting Believe It and supporting our veterans who were maybe not physically but otherwise damaged as a result of their service to this country.
Yeah. What time is that event?
It starts at 7 o'clock. Doors open at 7, and the band starts playing around 8.
So it's the music component. You gonna have a silent auction or anything?
We'll have a silent auction, and we'll have people around to explain to people about Believe It, and we'll have some of the dogs who've graduated, some of the vets that they're working with and helping out now, and some of the dogs who are currently in training. So I think it's going to be a great night.
Oh, thanks, John. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Again, that's tonight over at the Grand in Northfield. Thanks, Shawn. It was nice meeting you today.
Nice meeting you. Thank you for having me.
Look forward to visiting a little bit more in the future. Again, just starts with 3 simple words. I believe you.
Yes.
The Start by Believing campaign. That concludes today's edition of AM Minnesota on KDHLAM in Faribault, Minnesota. Have yourselves a super weekend.